Okay, we are live. Hello, welcome to Nonfiction Book Club. I'm Deboki. I'm one of your hosts. I'm here to talk about the books. Today we're going to be talking about On Immunity by Eula Biss. And with me is Nicole.
Hi, I'm Nicole. I'm also one of your co-hosts. We've been doing this for almost 2 years. It'll be 2 years in April, and it's amazing to me that we have not become any less awkward at this part.
Yeah,
Like,
we really should have a script.
yes. Oh, yeah, yep. It's fine. It's fine.
I also think that we do this every time, right? Like every time we're like, wait, we still don't. Because I think we used to do more of an intro. We were like,
Yeah.
we're going to explain
Here's
who
who I
we
am
are.
at this
And
point.
now I'm like, doesn't matter.
No.
Am I anyone
No.
except a person who is here to talk about the book?
Myself is an ephemeral concept, okay?
Exactly. Yeah, Colby says, Happy New Year. Happy New Year, everybody. We are in a new year. Also, because I guess January started on a Saturday, the fact that this book club was today, like, really, I think, snuck up on both of us. We're like, oh, we already have book club. Like, we're already on our first book club of the year.
I texted Deboki yesterday to tell her that I literally forgot, and like I was checking my email, like lying in bed looking at my email, and because I took this week off, so I was still lying in bed at a rather late hour.
Excellent.
Scrolling, like, and I saw the newsletter, the Nonfiction Book Club newsletter, and I was like staring at the ceiling for a second, trying to like think about dates and time. And I was like, oh yeah, really glad this book was so short because that email was me knowing.
This book was very short and like fast to read. At least my experience of it is like a very quick read, like especially because the chapters are like very breezy. And it's not like super, at least for me, like as we'll talk about, like the technical parts were for me like pretty easy to like kind of scan through. So it's like, yeah, hopefully for everyone, if you read it, it was like a good fast read, even when it was also kind of an intense read.
Yeah, yes. Yeah, fairly intense, but none of the sciencey stuff was that dense. It was that stuff was really easy to parse and like I don't know, like by design, written in super accessible language. Like, and the thing that this book is doing is principally like it's philosophical, which so like you could get through all of it pretty quickly. It's another one where I'm like, damn, my saving things for the last minute is like a genuine hindrance to this conversation though, because the project of the book is so philosophical. It is the kind of thing where I think you have to like sit with it. Like that's the thing. The actual reading experience itself is like super quick, whatever. But like the point is more, you read it. Now just like go sit with that for a minute.
Yeah, and process. So for context, what the book is a little bit hard to describe. No, that's okay. This is a part of our chaos intro. I guess the way that I would describe the book is sort of like kind of like a cultural analysis of like immunology, but particularly centered around vaccination and around like being like in the case of the author, her thought process around vaccinating her kid, and just kind of like how, I don't know, the culture around the conversations around vaccines and particularly obviously anti-vaccination. The book was published in 2014, and she gave birth around the like onset of the H1N1 pandemic. And so she talks about that in the beginning of the book, which was definitely a moment of like, pandemics, right? Like, I wonder what that's like. Like I had like these moments of like not snobbery, but where I was like, oh right, this is like she's talking about like the grocery stores having like hand sanitizer, and I'm like, oh right, like there was a time where that was striking, and now it's like so baked into like the like what I expect of places where like I'm like, isn't everyone just sort of like in pandemic mode all the time?
Yes.
Yeah. And that's part of the conversation that she's having around the vaccines, because she's talking about like how mothers she knew were kind of like talking about the choice to vaccinate their kids, partly with this pandemic, and then also with a lot of other diseases that kids get vaccinated for. And so a lot of her perspective, which I think she's very upfront about, but is coming very much from like a privileged white woman thinking about the choice to vaccinate her kids, and also like having conversations in these circles, which I think has come to sort of, I don't know, dominate a certain understanding of the anti-vaccination movement overall.
Mm-hmm.
So I think she's pretty like upfront about that, and she also has it in the notes, but she does also talk about this in a broader context around like why there are other communities that have a distrust of vaccines that are rooted in something real, as well as like other countries. And I think she's trying to sort of like grapple with like what vaccines mean, what public health means, how do we make these choices that are both very individual and very communal, which is, of course, again, super relevant. I mean, obviously, public health is always relevant, but it just feels like very like, this conversation that has been going on for 2 years now, around vaccines, around masking, everything just feels like very at the forefront of this book.
I mean, public health is always relevant, but it is also like a thing that she talks about later in the book, building off of everything that you just said, though, that like public health is always relevant. But for, I think, a long time pre this current pandemic, Mari in the chat, I wanted to yell, "You don't even know," which yes, pre like this moment, it did feel like there's a certain point of like privilege at which like public health is not about you. Like public health is everybody, like it's, and that is definitely a like weird and interesting thing about reading this book now in this moment, because that is a thing that has transformed pretty I mean, whatever, like I recognize that there are segments of the population that I don't know. Whatever. But like the idea that public health is always relevant is more broadly true now, like more accepted as true. I guess that's what I'm trying to say now than it was at the time that this book was published, I think. So
yeah, I think it's definitely more at the forefront of like how we talk about public health, because that is something she addresses, like the way that like it's very easy to label diseases as like a problem that's like over there. Like if you're growing up in like other communities and like you're kind of like, I think like I'm too rich for this problem, or like too privileged in these others way, where it's like this weird sort of like you acknowledge your privilege, but then like you kind of are like missing out on the point overall. But like that doesn't mean that you are exempt from the problem, like that you are still, because of the nature of like what health is and what like sharing a space, sharing a world is, you're still caught up in this overall system.
That was the thing, that those were my favorite parts of the book, where she kind of kept winding back to this idea in different places. I don't know what her background is. She says
I think she's a poet.
Okay, that's how, because that's at some point she describes that is how she describes herself, and you can feel that in the writing. And all she mentioned several academic friends who are different varieties of poets. Yes, that makes sense. But this idea of like of our bodies as belonging to a collective, like I don't know, I appreciated like the poetry of that, and two, again, now more than ever, it was I don't know, it's just really striking to be reading this in this moment in the middle of this freaking pandemic, which is so much bigger than any of the examples that she describes in this book.
And also like at this moment, I mean, every moment of the pandemic would have been an interesting one, I guess, to read this book in, but like this is like also this weird moment where like we have like this like weird kind of like, hey, everything's exploding again, but also a lot of people are vaccinated, but also a lot of people are, and like there's like this weird kind of like the stress that I feel about this era of the pandemic is more about the like a different kind of ambiguity than from what it was before. Like before, it felt like my choices were much more clear, and now my choices feel a little bit more like I don't know, like more finely, like there are more like knobs controlling them now, if that makes sense. Before it was like masked or no mask, like that's deciding like where, like outside, inside, like that's kind of deciding all of these things. And now it's like all of these different things of like people vaccinated, people masked, at my inside, outside, what's going on. Like it's, yeah, I don't know if that makes sense, but it just feels like messier in a way. That just struck me, especially building off of the fact that we have been at this for like so long now.
We've been at this for so long now. And also just, I don't know, like more things are happening now, but also we are still in the pandemic. So like that, the pandemic is not over, but also more things are happening. And also there are, you know, like assorted layers of control. And so, yes, like it makes it a lot harder to, to like track decisions, and the idea of planning anything still feels extremely fake. In this way that, like, I don't know, for all of 2020, it was just like, I don't know, I don't go anywhere. I go to the grocery store and I go to my house.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
Go to the grocery store and I wear my little mask. And I don't know, I guess there's a handful of stores that I would go to. I would leave my apartment maybe twice a month to run my little errands, and then I would go back to being in my apartment, and that was it. That was like the entire range of options available to me. Whereas now there is a greater range of options available, but also it's not like, oh, these options are available because we're done, you know?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I hate it here.
Just what was I gonna say? Oh, because there's a section where she talks about risk, which I thought was super interesting, because that's something that I've like seen people talk about. And also because I have economists in my life, the pandemic has been like an interesting time to have the economist perspective on risk and how like they think about it. Which has been funny, because like I am like a super risk averse person in general. I know this about myself. I am terrified of everything. You tell me something bad is going to happen, I'm like, that's going to happen. Like that's how risk works to me. And she talks in this book at some point about like risk in the context of making decisions about vaccines, and like the way that we like hear about certain like bad outcomes, and like kind of the way that certain bad outcomes like seem worse than others, and that kind of like messes around with our judgments of risk. And that's been something that I've seen people talking about in the context of the pandemic. And it's really interesting to me, and also like part of why I've had to like shut off the internet sometimes in my life, because I think one of the things that's like hard with risk is like there are ways that like we could like, I don't know, objectively quantify it, but also like it is such a personal like assessment. Like at the end of the day, like I said, like I am super risk averse, and like that doesn't mean that all my decisions around risk are necessarily logical, but like I know like the way that my brain is processing the risk, and that is like a super personal thing, and based on like what things I'm afraid of, right? And I feel like that's like a big part of the context for like, I don't know, things like pandemic choices, like whether you're going to go out or not, like those kinds of things, where like a lot of times when we talk, like, or not we, like, but like people, like just generally, when you see discourse about like how people are making choices about what to do in the pandemic or what not to do, and then maybe like in the context of this book, like around vaccines or not, like it's so hard, because there are times where you're just like, these are clear risks, but like, I don't know. Sorry, I'm getting to the point where I'm not sure what my point is, but it's just like, I think it's like just weird sometimes the way that like, it's hard for us to process that kind of like personal aspect of a thing, where it's like hard to see that the pandemic, like, I'm making this book all about the pandemic at this point, but like just the way that like risk feels different to different people. Like my experience of the pandemic is different from like people I know in Texas versus people like I know like in big cities. Like everyone has a different set of risk considerations based on like just where they live, because like the pandemic just feels different based on where they live, regardless of numbers, regardless of these other things. Yeah, and that's just like a thing that this book made me think about.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and is definitely a thing. Like, so I moved last year from Missoula, Montana, to Jefferson City, Missouri, and like on like the city level, yes, it feels different here than it did
Yeah.
there. And like
Mhm.
again, I don't know. I am still wearing my mask when I run my little errands, but it is me, the employees, and like 3 old people. And that's
Yeah.
it. That's it.
Yeah.
That's it. That's the extent of who is doing that.
Yeah.
So like I don't know. All of that just to say that yes, I think it definitely feels different, and that informs the because it is a collective thing, like because it is this thing that we are all in together. The what you are seeing around you is going to affect your like perception and understanding of it
Yeah.
unavoidably. So
Yeah. Yeah. I just like always think about like how I talk about it, like how I've experienced the pandemic compared to friends I know who like live in New York City, where like as soon as they got vaccines, they're like, we're gonna like go out all the time, but like go to places that like require vaccine card, like require mask if you don't do that. And then also at the same time, New York City had like at least where they were living had really good testing access. So it was like their entire set of like risk calculations, like I would still characterize them as cautious, but they were making these choices that I would not be making like at all where I was living. Like I wasn't going to go to like big concerts on a weekly basis kind of thing. And it's just like, oh right, like we just have like such different settings for like what we're making our choices in. We're like, even though this big thing is like universal in the background, it's like still different. But yeah, but then of course like Omicron happened and then New York City had problems. So
yeah,
I don't know. Like, I mean, we all had problems because it's all universal. Like it all just like spreads. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, to that end, my youngest sibling is in New York City, and like they came home for Thanksgiving, but then didn't come home for Christmas, basically, yeah, because of Omicron. Basically, it was like, no, can't now. So yes, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, Colby raised this point that it's also hard for people to reassess risk, where like people are holding on to fears, and that's like a thing that comes up a lot in the context. Like I've seen it come up a lot in science communication around vaccines, where people talk about how like sometimes if you give people evidence like contrary to what they believe, I think what studies show is they'll actually like double down on their belief, and so you're just kind of sitting there like, okay, but like how do I help people process this like thing? Like how do you explain it then? Like it feels almost like a trap.
Right. Yes. If explaining it entrenches the belief further, then what do?
Yeah. Which I guess like to me is what's interesting about this book, because I think like it's like almost like a conscious choice of hers to not be like, when you're talking about like the need to kind of sit with the book, one of the things that I was thinking about is like kind of there are like a couple points where I was like, what would I summarize her position as? Or like what would I say? And like I think like it's pretty clear she's like saying like vaccines are good. There are very good things about vaccines, but also acknowledging a lot of other aspects of like medicine in the US that are like difficult. But yeah, it's interesting to me that she's not like the. I think one of the things that makes this book effective, as someone who's thinking about it like from that science communication perspective, is that she's not presenting it as a science like focused book. She's like talking a lot about language and like culture and a lot of other things.
Yeah, there was a point. It's not like earlier in the book that I think this is what you're getting at. Correct me if I'm wrong, but where like I was like almost having a hard time parsing like what her point was, because even though on the whole I would say yes, the point of this book is go get vaccinated, but she was framing things in this way, like she was introducing all of these points of skepticism and it wasn't until I don't know, like 10, 20 pages later that it clicked that I was like, oh no, that's on I bristled at that because that wasn't for me. Like that section of the book, that whatever, like those things that were making me like whatever had like hackles up. Again, because of now, I honestly don't think that even those sections of the book that that I bristled at in 2014, if I had read this, I would have like I would have been able to get to the like I get what you're doing here much faster and like not have the immediate like are we gonna fight? Like reaction. That I did to some of those things. But they're yes, it's funny because we're having this that we were just saying, like, like, what do you do if to giving people evidence that their like beliefs are incorrect, and like that entrenches those beliefs, like, then what do you do? And like this book actually kind of feels like the answer to that question. Is like the way that she gets there feels like, because she spends so much time walking through her own skepticism. Like I feel like that would this feels like the more effective way to do that.
And I guess, like, of course, it's like not either or either. It's like she's like, this is like one approach, and it's like very rooted in who she is and like what her background is.
Although I will say, I did flag one thing from the notes. So she has the bit where she's talking about children with egg allergies can react to this particular vaccine, which is eggs, and she only mentions in the notes that her son got vaccinated.
I thought that was weird too.
And like, that feels like something you should have included in text. Like, why is this buried back here at on the second to last page of this rather lengthy notes section?
That was like a weird choice, because like she was saying like this was like part of what, and then she was just like, actually, but it's not a problem. And it's like, okay, but then like that could have, like, that seems like a part of the story. Like
yes. And I mean, like, that section where she brings that up was sort of built into the larger thing that, like, if you are, if you're immunocompromised and you are like, that I am her as her and her child with their like medical issues, like they are dependent on other people in that way. And like, I get that larger point that she was building towards, but I don't think that saying, oh, it turned out that I could and did vaccinate him undermines that point. I don't know. It was really weird to me to not include that.
Especially because it felt like it felt like both relevant, and also like it wouldn't have taken much to explain it. Like, it was like, I don't see this as distracting. So it's just like a weird thing. Colby brought that, like, a big part of her point is that the language we use can matter more than the information, and I think that's like super important. It's like a really like common thread, like or like one of the threads through the book is just like, what metaphors do we use, especially, and I love it. So my background is in immunology. Like my grad school work was like all around engineering immune system stuff, and in undergrad I was like doing modeling of immune system stuff too. And so I, as I mentioned last time when we announced this book, I grew up with like how like there are space kids and dinosaur kids. I was an immunology kid because like my parents raised me right. They were like
that's my favorite Deboki quote of all time. Continue. I was an immunology kid because my parents raised me right.
They did. My dad worked in vaccines. So like for bring your daughter or bring your kid to work day, I got to like see like infections like under the microscope, all that good stuff. We still have fond memories of like the Magic School Bus episode where they go into like Ralph's body to see it like fight like a cold or something. Anyways. What was the point of that? Okay, the point of that is that I just wanted to tell you guys about myself. If you didn't know that I love the immune system, now you know. But basically, I think like throughout like me working in immunology, I've like had to like figure out how to like explain immunology, and it's like weird because it is super complicated. And like one of the big common metaphors that she discusses is our tendency to discuss immunology as like war, where it's like a war between like what's inside our body and like what's not supposed to be there. There's a lot of like just like a lot of metaphors around like battling and vigilance and surveillance and all of this stuff, which I think like it's hard to avoid that. It's hard not to describe those things in that way. And especially like over the course of the pandemic, seeing like articles come out trying to explain the immune system, I think it's been easy to kind of to default to that language because it makes it like feel like something that your body is like actively doing against whatever virus or whatever. But it is also, it is also weird because it's like the immune system is sort of like I think of it as like a self-running surveillance or like like a self-running security system, but it's also like not really that. Like there's a lot of ways that the immune system is like to me fundamentally much more about identity than it is about like war, because it's so much about defining like what is you versus what is not you, like at least the way that like the things that I worked on, that's sort of like what its goal was. Yeah, I really like, I was like in love with her whole language metaphor discussion. I found it like super fascinating. And it's one of those things that I feel like I can obviously ramble on without getting to a clear point, because I'm just like, I agree. Like, it's hard to describe the immune system because it is like a very complicated, weird thing. It's like, she even talked about it's like not really fully even a system. It's not like a series of organs. It's just a thing that is all over our body. Sorry, I feel like I gave you nothing to work with there.
No, it is. I know the opposite. Like it's just that it's like a lot is more the thing that like it's a lot to process and take in. Also, I was doing my little I did that so many times while I was reading this book too, and specifically in the like the metaphor, like the languagey sections, like that. Yes, that stuff also. It's the stuff that I'm like, I want to sit longer. I need to, I need to digest it. I made a mistake.
Yeah. There's like a pretty, I'm trying to think. Ed Yong wrote this article called "Immunology is Where Intuition Goes to Die," and that's like my favorite way that like I think like you can describe the immune system. And I think like part of it is because we don't have a good, clear metaphor for it. Like we don't have a good, like there's not like a good central unifying metaphor for like what the immune system does, because you can settle on one definition, but then like you come up against all these weird things that the immune system does that doesn't like follow that, or like is in service of something else, or like in service of another definition. So you're just like, okay, I don't know how to I don't know how to intuit what is going on.
Right. Yeah. Immune system. Thank you, immune system, for
the other common like literary thread through the whole thing is her talking about like
vampires.
I'm like not expecting this much Dracula discourse.
There was a lot of vampire stuff going on in here. A shocking amount of vampires present in this book. I really appreciate it. There was a lot of stuff about like another theme that she sort of kept circling back to is the ways in which discussions of like public health and like vaccination are also just debates over vaccination then as now are often cast as debates over the integrity of science, so they could just as easily be understood as conversations about power, which is something that comes up just like a ton in this book, both in terms of like what we were talking about earlier, that like the idea that the choice to not be vaccinated, like that those problems are somebody else. Hep B was the big one that like came up a bunch that upper middle class white people don't need to worry about Hep B vaccinations because that's not our problem. I don't know. I appreciated all of that. And I think that like that also ties back to the language stuff too, just in that like, because so much of the language that we use is like war centric, like I think that also ends up bleeding over into the like the power dynamics in
interesting
certain ways. That I can't elaborate on because this is a thought that I'm forming out loud right now.
Okay. I think if I were to run with it without knowing for sure if this is the right track, I feel like kind of like what that's making me think of is like, okay, like if we're thinking of like our immune system as like a war, and it's like, this is my dominion, like this is like my place, this is like where I have control, like, which I think is also like a big part of like the ideas like that people are kind of like struggling with when it comes to deciding things around like vaccines or other choices around pandemics, for example, like feeling like a sense of control over your surroundings. And so like there's like the idea of the battle within, this like biological battle, and like feeling like you are the one who has the most information because it is your body, which like there are way, and like this is like one of the things that's interesting about this book is, to me at least, is that it is about the immune system, but it's also so much about birth, because she had this like really traumatic birth experience, and also because it is about her considerations as a mother, and she talks about like how a lot of women's experiences with medicine have probably kind of informed what has become like a very mother-driven anti-vax movement, because if you've had a very traumatic experience with birth, which a lot of people have, then yeah, like you might kind of end up with a lot of distrust of medicine, whether or not all of that is founded in like the reality of like pediatric care. Yeah, so I think there is like, yeah, there's just like, there's something about that, like that sense of having that power, and having that like control over your own body, and like relating it to that like kind of war metaphor that makes it seem like it is like this inner power struggle, I guess. I don't know if that's what you were getting at, but that's like, what it made me think of.
Yes.
Yeah.
Wasn't the power idea the root of the conscientious objector bit too? Yeah. Yes. I think that was also one of the things that I highlighted too, but I don't remember why. So
yeah, I think it like came there, it like comes up also in the discussion around like capitalism. I think like she had sort of an interesting, again, one of those sort of like, not necessarily like, more of a kind of like got to sit with this kind of point, around like the ways that capitalism has sort of like limited our imagination, because we're like so quick to blame capitalism, versus like, yeah. Oh, right. Sorry. No, sorry. The conscious objector, I'm now remembering. Right. It started out as like, conscientious objector started out as like an anti-vax, like I'm not gonna, like I'm objecting to get this vaccine, and then later got co-opted into like actual like opposition to war.
Yes.
Yeah. Because, and that was like rooted in part on like who is kind of feeling subjected to other forces requiring them to get vaccines.
Yeah. I mean, I guess now is maybe the relevant time to say that my upbringing was the polar opposite, in that my mom is Christian Scientist, and so I was like, she did like fill out the, I don't know, it was never like the religious exemption forms or whatever, all through my like public schooling experience, and must have submitted something to my university when I went off to college. But then my sophomore year of college, I studied abroad. And so before doing my study abroad, I studied abroad in the spring. And so then like the summer before I started my sophomore year, as soon as I got into my program, like that August, I went on the CDC website to pull up the like schedule of vaccinations. And then I built myself a little spreadsheet that I still have, where I tracked, because I had to do it back and forth between like, because I was at home, but then I was also at school. So like I couldn't, like my doctor's office couldn't keep track of it. Like I had to track it myself. And so personally following here is, and then also separately, there's like some stuff I had to get because I was going like yellow fever and something else too that I'm forgetting now. But anyway, yes. So all of that stuff hit I don't know, hit in a particularly strong way, and like is definitely a thing that I have thought a lot about over the years, because my siblings and I are all old enough that like we were already in school by the time my youngest sibling was born in 1995. So they would have just been, the Wakefield's paper would have been published like right before. And so it's like it's, I don't know, it's an interest. It's like, it's a thing that I think about a lot because I was not vaccinated as a child, but I am actually too old to have not been vaccinated for the reason that most, like, you know what I'm saying? Like that, like the assumption that you would make based on that information doesn't actually track because I'm about 10 years too old for that to be true. And also like, it's literally not the case. But this whole thing about like, you know, like herd immunity, I think about that a lot because again, like I am 10 years too old, for that to have been part of the issue, like, for me, which means that I statistically speaking, I probably didn't have any other kids in my classes growing up who were not vaccinated, right? So like I literally was that that one person.
Interesting.
I don't know. I am now rambling because I'm like, this is like it's a very big thing that I have had a lot of years to think about and still like, I don't, what is, I don't know.
Yeah. I don't know. I feel like it's hard to read this book without like feeling some way about it personally. Like it is, because it is a choice that like every family is making. Like for me, it's like through the lens of like my parents, like my dad worked in vaccines. And so like that was like a thing I grew up with of like just like being like, yeah, cool, vaccines are like like, I don't know, like that's just like my parents were like, yeah, vaccines are awesome. And like I grew up with stories of like Jonas Salk and stuff. And so that was like part of like what made that personal for me. And I think for everyone else, like especially like the way she's talking about making choices and like dissecting information, like she's talking about like Googling these chemicals and stuff that I was like, yeah, I relate to that, where you're kind of like, this thing sounds bad, I got to figure out what it is. And then you find out a bad thing about it, but then ultimately like, does that mean it's bad? Like water is toxic at high doses too. Like all of those things are like it is like the book to me feels like actually what it's really about is anxiety. Like how do you make choices? Like how do you make choices in this case in a very specific context, but around like a lot of different things that you're balancing that affect you and also affect people around you. So it is like very personal in that way.
Yeah. It is interesting too, because at this point, all of my siblings, for various different reasons, like as adults, like actually in probably the first 4 years after graduating high school, ultimately ended up getting all of our vaccines, but like went about it in very different ways. I am confident that I was the most methodical about it. There's no way any of my siblings went about it in the way that I did. But
Can I ask, like, was it were there vaccines that were harder to get, like, because you weren't young, or like was all of it like it was still okay?
I did. So it was sort of a thing. I do remember making the appointments to get the polio vaccine specifically. Was one where the making the appointment, the I don't know, nurse, whatever, the schedule it. Whatever. I don't know anything about how doctors' offices work. This is also like an offshoot of my upbringing, is that like I did not receive medical socialization, and so anything surrounding like engaging with like doctors' offices freaks me the hell out. I mean, like I realize that it scares a lot of people, but like specifically the thing that I have anxiety about is like the social dynamics, that I'm like, I don't know the script here. Anyway, but when I was making those appointments, I on both sides, the first appointment that I made here and the first appointment that I made in DC, because that's a three one. I forget, so the third one would have been here. The fact that I still remember that that's a 3, that is wild to me. But anyway, being told that I got this vaccine when I was a baby, and just having to be like, listen, ma'am, I'm not setting up an appointment to get 7 shots because that's my idea of a good time. Like, I promise you, I did not get this vaccine as a child, and I do not want to be the person that brings polio back to America. Like, I just, so anyway.
The That's pretty wild. So it's like almost like it's like more of like a human issue of getting the vaccine, of like being like, no, I like actually do not have these. Like,
yes, yeah.
wow,
Most of my like recollection of the experience was purely like the human aspect of it. But I at no point like my list of things that I said, like I had the thing. I was like, okay, this is what I need today. This is what I need at this appointment. In retrospect, this also now seems sort of insane to me that like I wasn't, I don't know, where was the primary care physician at that first round of appointments, not like weighing in on nobody was overseeing this. I had my little CDC list and I just set up the appointments and said, I need this. And they gave it to them.
You had to decide your vaccine schedule.
Yes. I got it. I got HPV vaccine was new at the time. Got that. Like I went there. I ran the gamut. I was like, okay, we're doing this. But
this is funny
because the human.
Sorry, no, go on.
No, yes.
That's really interesting because one of the things that was like I had like just thought about like right before we got on to this call. So one thing that this book had struck me compared to also the previous book that we did on my channel, which was Reader Come Home, is like those are both books very much told through the perspective of like we're going to dissect something, but we're going to dissect it through the lens of like how we do it with our children. So that book is like how do we like pass on reading to our children, and this is like about how do we like immunize our children, or how do we consider our children, how do we like I don't know. Whatever. Like how do we take care of kids basically? And it like was interesting to me that this book felt like naturally kind of geared towards that, because it was like, oh, right. Like the only shots that for me, like have had to decide in my adulthood are like COVID and flu probably. Like, I don't think I've had other shots come up. Like all of my shots had been decided before. And like, so I thought for me, like, I was like, oh yeah, that makes sense. But now it's like, all right, that's like not a universal experience at all. Like you have the exact opposite.
Right. Yes. That it was entirely a choice that I had to make for my own self. And then, more recently, a choice that I had to make I had to make the choice for other people. So I guess this is also my mom and both of her siblings have like got the COVID. That's the first vaccine because my grandma is a Christian Scientist. And so that's like a family thing. But the three of my mom and her two siblings, the first vaccine that they received in their lives was the COVID vaccine. And so that's, I don't know, that's like a whole other, I don't know. My mom got it more or less because I gave her an ultimatum that I was like, listen, I'm not getting on a plane to come to you unless you do this thing. And we had a whole long conversation about where I was basically like the crux of it was like, if the thing is that you don't need this, like that's at the root of it. You don't need this. It's not that you think that it is like poisonous. You don't do it because you don't believe that it is necessary. I am asking you to do this for me. I don't give a shit if you believe in it. Just do it because it will make me happy. And that was basically that was my winning argument. But
I feel like I've heard versions of that story when people have talked about like people who have made that choice.
My uncle made the choice himself, like was not persuaded into it, but more or less on those same basic grounds of like, what would it hurt was sort of the thing why he did it. I don't know. It is very interesting to me because I know quite a few people who have been vaccinated, but like don't believe in it. And like that is like sort of a fascinating, I don't know. I do not care if you believe in it. I just need you to do it. Super don't care how you feel about it as long as you go do it. But like, I don't know. It has been interesting, the different reasons actually, and running through the list. My aunt, I have not talked to her about it, but my cousin framed it more or less as like, it will be inconvenient to not have it. And like, that's basically why she did it. Was like, okay, I'll go do this because my life is about to get harder and more inconvenient if I don't have this little card.
Is that because of like, the mandates?
Yes. She's in California. And so she's in San Diego area. And so, yes, it was just like, okay, my life will be too inconvenient if I don't go get this card. So three slightly different sets of reasons why they made this, or I don't know, ways paths to making this choice that were not about, I need to do this thing, you know, to protect myself and those around me. They had other reasons, but I don't know. They did it. That's all I care about.
Yeah. That's really fascinating, because I feel like that is like I think the inconvenient one I kind of love, because it feels like such a like social sciencey, like testable way to like see like, oh, does this work? Yeah. I mean, at least for one person, like n equals 1, it sure did.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. I think also central to that is, though, like the relationship building that you have in those appeals. And like, I think, I don't know, this is true of so many things, that like, if you're trying to move people, that I don't know, it's a little bit like heartbreaking to know that, like, in, you know, all the psychom work, that a lot of that is not reaching people, because they're like, no, you are, I don't know, whatever it is that is causing people to get that position of like, no, you're part of the vast conspiracy or whatever. That was also a section, the thing that I loved. She had like a brief aside about conspiracies, but
she talks about like how paranoia unites people, and I was like, yep.
Yes. And she basically more or less landed on like, my big thing with all conspiracy theories is the level of like the coordination and cooperation at like, how do you not, how does that seem more plausible to you than like, I don't get it. How is it more plausible to you that you know, I don't know, many governments have been coordinating to lie about the moon landing? Like, I don't know, whatever, just like that kind of thing. Anyway, personal, just that you know, that there's a level at which, I don't know, there is only so much that sort of like mass communication can achieve, and that there are certain things where it is ultimately incumbent upon us to like find the places where we can do some of that work in one-on-one spaces, like where possible. I mean, obviously, you know, like your whole family is there's not much there for me, though. There's a lot there. And so it's like, I can send them I can like send my family articles all day long. That is not going to do the work in the way that actual conversations will do.
And I think that's like one of the things that's become so hard about like conversations about vaccines, especially online. Like I've muted COVID on Twitter. Like I'm at a point where I'm like, this is not,
I don't need the Twitter discourse on.
Exactly. And so like using Twitter to describe SciComm is never a good choice, because like Twitter is so inherently like polarized and just like incentivizing very like people dunking on each other, which is my least favorite form of science communication. I feel like it's very easy to be like, you're dumb, and it's kind of like, yeah, well, we're all dumb about something. Like you won't like,
especially because a lot of those takes are in bad faith too, where it's like you are deliberately choosing the worst possible reading of this statement so that you can like look smart by calling somebody else an idiot.
And I feel like that's the thing that I ultimately like appreciated about this book, like, because I don't know if this is going to like, if this is a book that's going to change people's mind. I can't speak to what, like, if you are in an anti-vax position, whether or not this book would do something like that. But I think what I appreciated about it, and it's hard, this is like, I think a really difficult needle to thread, because it's because the public health component is so communal. Like, there's a part of me that is judgmental of someone who is going to make this certain choice and then be like, you know, you're putting other people's lives at risk. But also I think like she's writing this with a lot of empathy for why people are entering into these conversations and going down different rabbit holes and ending up at the decisions that they do, and still feeling like the book is still secure in its position while like balancing those two things. Because I think that's the thing that's hard with the science writing and science psychom side, where you're like, you just like want people to believe, like whether it's climate change, like the fact that COVID was starting, wearing masks, like you just like want to like have people believe. You just want to be like, look, this is for everyone's benefit. If we all agree on this thing, we are going to be better off, like as a community, like we will be better off. But you can't, like, the nature of it is that you cannot force people to believe something. Like you cannot make someone believe something like that. And there are reasons, like I didn't appreciate this until I was like in grad school, going to conversations about science policy, because like if you talk to people who are working on the policy side, what their job is, like everyone from the science side is like, you have to be making evidence-based decisions. You have to be making these decisions based on science. And if you talk to the policy people, they're like, yeah, that's true. But also like, we have like people who are coming to us with like very specific personal problems or very specific personally motivated issues that they care about that we're trying to balance. And like, that is a thing that like is going to shape how people like interpret what you bring to them as the science. It's going to inform the way that they respond to it. And like, you know, like we talked about with the risk, it's going to like change their perception of like what they need to do about it.
Yeah.
But then you still just want to be like, but please,
please,
real.
please.
The vaccine will help you.
It will help you. Did you watch Don't Look Up?
No, I haven't. I can't.
Yeah, you can't. No, don't do it.
Yeah.
Don't do it. All of your suspicions about how too real it will be are correct.
Yeah.
It's just upsetting. It was just...
I think what I'm like most worried about is like the smugness, because I think like again, coming from that science side where like I've seen how smug, like how easy it is to be smug about like thinking you're right. And then you're like, yeah, but cool. But the thing you're right about is like terrible shit happening. And like, I don't want to be smug about that. Like, I don't like, I don't know. Which I don't know if that's what the movie does, but like, that's just what the vibe the trailer gave me.
Yeah, whatever. That was not the vibe that I got, but it is definitely just this thing of like all of these things. My thing was more like a lot of the like the jokey bits, they were funny jokes, but like they weren't funny because I'm just like, this feels like how it would go down. Like I had like the moment that we're living through right now was telling me that, yep, this is how we'd respond to the fucking planet destroying meteor. So I'm not amused. I'm sad and angry and scared. So
it's like,
not a good time.
Reading Hank's books, like reading An Absolutely Remarkable Thing and being like, oh right, nope, this is like, because I can't remember what it was it that book or the next one? There was stuff in there where I was like, I feel like he wrote this before we fully like manifested that that's what we would do in like whatever crisis situation. But then that happened, and the only saving grace is that the books are built, like have hope built into them. And I was like, okay, like this is like keeping me still in the book, but I'm just like, like, this is hard.
I reread the first book right before the second one came out, and so like I read it twice the year that it came, like it's like pre-pandemic, but then I reread the first book in 2020, and the thing that I remember being the most striking is throughout, especially the first half of the book, April has all of these little asides that are just like haha, we were so naive then. Oh, how little we knew then. And I just like reading it in the pandemic, I was just like, oh my God. Oh my God. It's too much.
And that's what reading this book felt like at times, because it was like everything about this book is 100% spot on for me, at least, and like at the same time I'm like, this still feels naive, like it still feels like it is written like without the full urgency of everything going on right now, which is good. Like I'm actually glad, like I'm glad that somehow like it escapes that, but I was still like, oh boy.
You don't even know. Well,
there was like one other thing I was going to bring up, and now I like completely forgot.
I had set the book down on one of the things that I wanted to say, which is, so I really only had two flags of things that I was like, okay. One was the thing I already said, which was the get her son getting the flu shot. The other one was just in the section where she was talking about like women, like the sort of like gendered nature of engaging with care. She starts talking about how like a few, this is, I don't know, plague era, that like these women, they did not experiment, they did not practice science. This is like one paragraph that I don't know, like I highlighted it to be like, there's the first line and then there's a line later that like in the same paragraph. So the first thing is they did not experiment, did not practice science as we know it, and had little empirical data to support their treatments. And then later in that same paragraph, she says this saint cataloged the healing properties of 213 medicinal plants. Women lay healers knew of recipes for effective painkillers and anti-inflammatories. Like I don't know, like that, those two sentences together just struck me in that I'm like, well, what are you saying? Like, I don't know. It frustrated me because of all of the other points that she is making. That was one where I was like, I don't agree. Like in the context of what you are saying, this sentence bothers me, both because I feel like it's kind of undercutting some of the other, actually that whole paragraph, that whole chapter. I'm not entirely sure what she was getting at, because she was building towards this thing of like women's intuition, like we should trust women, but also women, you need to listen to science. There was a little bit of like weird, I don't know, that whole chapter was weird to me. And like
I think I understand what she was going for there, because I think she's specifically saying like they're not doing like scientific method, like developing a hypothesis, doing an experiment, that kind of thing. I think there's a lot of like, okay, we have roughly seen that if we use this plant, it seems like this thing is happening, and so like that is like the intuition, but it's not done in a way that like we would like consider to be scientific and measured and like actually quantified in any way.
Okay.
But I get what you mean. Like I get why it's like kind of weird. But I think it is sort of like one of those like important subtleties in terms of like how we talk about science. Because I think it's like one of the challenges too in terms of like how like things get differentiated as Western medicine versus Eastern medicine, and like how like a lot of like Eastern medicine. I don't want to say I don't know enough about Eastern medicine or like kind of like non-Western medicine to like speak to like what has gone into it, but I think the perception of it is that it's something that is like very untested, even though there have been times where like actually when scientists have gone through that like medicine like kind of literature, they have found actual like things that once we test them and quantify them and go through a whole scientific method with them, we can like pinpoint things. Like I think the most famous example is a malaria drug that like actually like the origins of it came from a Chinese medicine, I believe, that just eventually people realized there was like a specific compound in it that was like treating malaria, I think. Pretty sure it was malaria. And it ended up like this medicine ended up winning like the Nobel Prize. So like very like impactful. But because of its origins, it was sort of like not necessarily like this thing that people were like super like, oh yeah, we should definitely check this out. And that's the way that I understood this, especially because it's like about like herbs and stuff, where it's like I think there was a lot of that kind of folk medicine where you're kind of like, yeah, we see this thing and we have this intuition around it, but not necessarily like tested.
That makes sense. I mean, yes, that all makes sense to me. I don't know. I just that chapter winds around to a point that is basically saying, I don't know, that is gendered in ways that made me uncomfy, I guess.
Yeah.
And it was like one of the rare moments where I felt that she was being a little condescending. I guess. And it struck me because of how like that is not a sense that I got at any other point in the book. But I don't know, just the whole thing of like, it's good that you have intuition, but listen to science. But it was like mothers, it was like so specific that it was like, or not specific, it was making this sweeping generalization that like mothers, intuition's good, but mothers really need to learn to appreciate science. And I just was like, the vibes are off here. Yeah,
I think that's fair. And I think that's actually like one of the things that's just like straight up like hard. Like I think that's like one of the things that's like really complicated about like, I mean, like motherhood in particular. Like, I mean, she's like very like like very much framing it around like how medicine has treated women in particular, and women are not the only people who get pregnant, but like I like historically like that's the context that she's presenting this in. And so I think like that is one of like I think that's like part of the problem is like when you have been, and I think she relates this in other areas too, is like there and it kind of goes to this thing she talks about earlier is like this idea of trust, where like if you have been like treated badly by a medical system that is based on science, it ruins your trust with that system, and then also makes it difficult to balance your intuition with that like establishment. Like it is like I don't know, my own like personal experience of having had like a really bad miscarriage experience, and then after having like I was super anemic after, and like had this whole night where I was like convinced I was having a heart attack. Like that was my intuition about my body, is like I am dying. Like, and it was just because like I was like had no blood in my body. It was just like my heart was pumping like very heavily, but like I like had to go into the doctor next day and just be like, look, I feel like I'm dying, and they had to be like, look, you're not. And like that is like the extent to which like they can do anything. And it's like hard, I think, like with like pregnancy in particular, like it's like a time when your whole body is just like doing something completely different from what it's done before. And then like yeah, like I think it's just that's like where that balance of intuition and science I think just becomes so fraught, because it's just like to a certain extent you're the only one who knows what your body is feeling like, and then at the same time you have to just be like, well, if this is what it says, this is what it says. And I mean, they were correct in my case, I was not dying, but like you know, like at the time, like you could not, like at midnight when like I feel like my heart is pounding, like you cannot convince me otherwise, right?
Yes.
So,
yeah. I had a whole, this is like way milder, wholly not at all the same thing.
But
when I first got on my medication that I'm taking now, it was like during the pandemic. And it's I think Reddit of all places, there's a subreddit dedicated to this medication. And I was like reading people's experiences with it. And a lot of people described this same thing. And that was like a great comfort. But like elevated heart rate is like a thing, and especially like getting on it. And I was taking like I'm on a fairly large dose, and so the first like I don't know, it's like days 5, 6, and 7 of getting on it. It was like at night, like I could not sleep because I felt like I felt like I was dying, like felt, and like and then like I was like calling a line to be like, but then also we were in the middle of a pandemic, and this is like October, I think, of 2020, and so I'm just like, if I am not actually dying, I can't go to the hospital. How do I like? I don't. This is me just sitting on my couch trying to decide if I was truly dying. Needed to go to the ER. So anyway.
I like called the doctor and was like, look, I cannot tell if I am panicking or having a heart attack, but the fact that I like think I'm having a heart attack is definitely contributing to this. Like I know this intellectually, but none of this is going away. So. Bodies are hard to understand. Like, I don't know. I think that's like why the way she talks about metaphor and body just like really kind of like spoke to me, because I was like, it's hard.
Well, and body is it is extremely weird, and also just like you know, we were joking about like, oh, who are we, whatever, but I don't know, like the way that your body plays into like your sense of self, I think is also I don't know, just interesting and fraught and complicated. And, another thing that we could talk about for an hour, but we've already been talking for an hour.
I think at some point I might want to pick up the book. Like she kept citing, I think, Susan Sontag, like writing about getting cancer. I was like, that sounds like a book we should read at some point. So
I agree.
At some point. Maybe in a bit, not right now.
We need a brief breather.
From bodies.
From bodies. But yes, that was also one that I in my head was like, yep, that is one to do. I guess this is our segue into what we're gonna do next time. Sure, great. This is it. I have a sad note for myself in our spreadsheet, which is Nicole. There is no audiobook for this one. So I have once again hurting myself. I am only moderately sure what this book is about, to be honest. So the book is Irresistible Empire, America's Advance Through 20th Century Europe by Victoria de Grazia. I am really excited about it. So I took a class in college that had a weird name. It was like International Cold War or something like that. It had a weird name because it was like, the point was, we think about the Cold War as being a struggle between two specific powers, but in fact, like, the whole world was basically turned into a chessboard, and so like it affected more than just the two entities clashing. It was a really, really good. I loved this class so much. Our professor was he was a historian at the State Department, and the class was in the evenings because he just like loved. He just, I don't know, like got off work and was like, now I'm going to go talk to a bunch of 20-year-olds about this stuff. And like a bunch of late Cold War things were being newly declassified. And he was always so excited when we got to a thing that was like, and here's this new document that I can share with you. Because it was just declassified. Like,
that's
like
amazing.
Early 80s stuff. Really, really interesting class. I loved it so much. I kept all of the books that we read for this class and have been like slowly making, I mean, like in this class though, we didn't like read any of these books cover to cover. This is an undergrad class. So it was like, you know, we were assigned like sections of it. So like I had to buy these whole books and I read maybe, I don't know, I have like notes and highlights going like 40 pages into this book. Like that's it. That is all. That's all we had to read for my class. And so anyway, so I have like a stack, and I've been making my way through them. I've read several of them now, like cover to cover. But anyway, so that is how this wound up on the list. So it is from that. I am pretty sure that this book is that this is more sociological in nature, which is the other reason why I picked this one specifically, because I have others that are more like history-ish that I probably wouldn't pick to do for this, because I think that's trickier to talk about in the way that we have set this up. I think that more explicit history books would be harder for us to talk about. But I think that this one is about the use of capitalism and consumerism to essentially like win Europe for the US in the Cold War. Like that, I think. I might be wrong. That might not be what it's about. That is my like loose recollection. But we're gonna find out together what this book is about.
When we're reading it at the last minute, like the night before, reading like 400 pages without an audiobook.
Oh God. Choices have been made. It's fine. It's fine. It's gonna be what it's gonna be. I like ripped my room apart trying to find this stupid book too. So because I packed it and I didn't, it was in the one badly labeled, but I labeled all of my book boxes so well. And it was in the one that I didn't label well.
Oh no.
Naturally. I opened every other box and then it was in the random box. But anyway, that's what we're going to do. Any other thoughts about this one that we just read?
Yeah. Sorry, we always forget to do also this thing where we ask if other people had questions or thoughts they wanted to add.
Yes. And also our like concluding, did you like it?
Yeah.
And the answer is always obvious by the time we get to this point. But Devoki, did you enjoy this book?
I did enjoy it. I think like especially like all of the discussion around metaphor and immunology was like so perfectly like suited for me. Like there was no way I was like not like, the only way I was gonna not like it is if I thought she made a bad argument or like didn't present it well. But for me it was like, yep, this is my jam. Like how do we talk about the immune system?
Yes, I also really enjoyed this. I also appreciate the way in which it was about like language and communication. That has been really interesting. Like on the, over the course of this project, my favorite science books have consistently been the science books that are as much about science communication as they are about like science itself. Like that.
Yeah.
beautiful.
Yeah, for sure.
Love that.
Yeah.
love when we're also thinking about how we think about things, how we talk about things.
Yeah. Yeah, because I feel like that's just so much more interesting than just being like, okay, here's a science. Like science to me is ultimately actually just like a question of language. Like if you talk to scientists from different fields, I think that like I think of them as having different languages. I think of physicists as having a very set language. Biologists have a set language. Bioengineers have like a.
She talks about that too in here as well.
Yeah. And it's like very like clear in like how people talk about the results and how they use that vocabulary, and even among different fields you might use the same words very differently. So I think it's like, yeah, this is my favorite thing to dissect.
I love it.
Yeah,
it's great. Well,
cool.
What a great start to our year. To another year.
Okay, cool. So yeah, thank you guys. Thanks everyone for joining us for our first nonfiction book club. We'll see you guys on February 12th over on Nicole's channel to talk about Irresistible Empire.